Good afternoon. My name is Lawrence Cross. I'm the CEO of GoldGram. We're a Singapore incorporated company regulated by the Monetary Authority in Singapore. And I'm here today to speak to you about asset backing tokens, generally with commodities, but in our case, we've chosen gold and ultimately silver, precious metals. Now, the intrinsic difference when choosing a commodity is a commodity that's easily stored. Obviously, if you're trying to commoditize oil or something, you have to look at the ramifications of where you store it. In the case of gold or silver, they're stored in a vault. In the case of our gold, in the Royal Canadian Mint. The most important things, and there are many people tokenizing assets on blockchain. The most important thing is how intrinsically linked the token is to the asset in the event of a default, because it's no good having a token and when things go wrong trying to claim the token and you find that you have no right of ownership. So really what you're looking at is a digitized warehouse receipt. So I would say the most important thing is the intrinsic and inextricable link of the token to the asset. And in the case of gold, gold has a reference or serial number. In the case of silver, the same. And that, with GoldGram, is embedded into the token. Now, I'll come to the technology behind it, and we're here at CordaCon, and obviously we're talking about Corda as a ledger. The second is when buying a commodity, to buy at live real-time prices. So it's no good if I'm selling you gold today at yesterday's price, or vice versa, you're trying to sell it back to me and I'm giving you a different price. So a live price coming in to the platform, refreshing in the case of our GoldGram coin every 5 seconds. So a bit like trading Forex. Third thing is obviously in terms of scalability is you should be fully automated. This idea of people trying to buy something, waiting days, sometimes hours at least, but days before they get a confirmed price and proof of ownership is not very scalable. It doesn't make the platform very highly liquid. So what we've done with GoldGram is we initially started out, we approached this looking at the traditional cryptocurrency market, which suffered from two problems. One was volatility, still today. Second was spendability. And the first GoldGram coin was actually built on a private hyperledger, public Ethereum as an ERC20 token. And we are now building on the Corda network, and I'll explain the use cases. But the most important there is that when you buy the asset, as I say, it's a live price. When you sell it, you're getting a live price. And in the case of our Ethereum and Hyperledger, we've linked to a Visa card. So you can spend at a merchant, and when you buy a coffee, if a gram of gold and 1 GoldGram coin is the value is 1 gram of gold. If a gram of gold is $48 and you're buying a $4.80 cup of coffee, 10% of the coin is sold real time in the background. Now, in the case of Corda, what makes Corda interesting compared to the public blockchain is that Corda, obviously, the need-to-know basis exists. So you don't have this public information free-for-all. So I think that's vitally important when doing transactions, particularly banking transactions between two parties. And the fact that any transaction requires if you like, the seller and the buyer to have pre-agreed. On the public chain, I can just transfer to any wallet if I have the public wallet address. On Corda, that can't happen unless you've got the two parties in agreement, the peer-to-peer agreement. So that's of interest to us as far as GoldGram coin and Corda goes. Now, if you look at gold as a commodity, gold's been around as a form of money for millennia. And its principal attractiveness is obviously its durability. So you could have those coins around today. I myself, at a previous life, was a salvage diver, and I used to salvage gold from sunken ships. And I would pull gold out, not as old as those, they were from the Victorian era, coins that had been underwater for 200 years, were in the same condition as the day they were loaded onto the ship. Its durability and the fact that it's rare and difficult to find. Now, there are many arguments as to whether other cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, etc., are digital gold, and I think that the jury's out on that. But the rareness and the value of gold, JP Morgan said that money is gold and nothing else. That with gold you have no counterparty risk if you have the physical gold. Now, physical gold is not easy to use in day-to-day life. So up until 1971, most currencies, and particularly under the Bretton Woods system, were linked to gold. In the case of the Bretton Woods, the dollar was linked to gold and every other currency was linked to the dollar. That link was broken in 71. America was coming out of the Vietnam War. They had high inflation. They had issued, since 1944, when Bretton Woods was first signed, 12 times as many dollars internationally than there was gold sitting in Fort Knox. And Charles de Gaulle picked up on this in around mid-60s and actually called for all his gold dollars to be redeemed in physical gold, because written on the gold dollar was it was redeemable for physical gold. And once he started to do that, the Americans realized by the late 60s that if they kept on sending gold out, they'd have no more gold left in the country. So this was one of the reasons that Nixon abandoned temporarily the gold standard in 71, and that became a permanent thing later on. And other countries, once America abandoned it, fell away too. What happened to the price of gold then, which was $35 an ounce in 71, it shot right up. And today we're sitting at about $1,500. So the most important thing with gold is not what price it is, but the fact that its buying power remains the same. If the dollar halved in value, gold would be $3,000 an ounce, but it would still buy you the same. So this is something why we feel a gold token has an application in this modern world, not to replace what we call fiat money, the dollar, the euro, the yen, but alongside those currencies. Now, particularly when it comes to Corda, which has a large consortium of banks, etc., we see gold as being something, this is showing you the gold price over the years coming up to today. We see gold as an asset that could be used by banks. It's recognized by the Bank for International Settlements as a tier 1 asset as of April this year, which means if you have $1 million of gold in the vault, you can show that on your balance sheet as $1 million. The only other tier 1 asset is US dollars cash. So now if you look at that, you see the trend of central banks selling their gold up until the financial crisis. And since then, how banks have been accumulating gold. Now you've got to understand a central bank doesn't take a 10-year view, they take a 100-year view. Most of those central banks are actually in Asia that are buying, the Russians, the Chinese, all buying gold, India. But you can see that trend going up. Right now, if you look at the gold ownership per country, the US still has a large amount of gold, or purports to have a large amount of gold. They're very secretive about when you actually do an inventory of that gold. So we see the use of GoldGram coin on the Corda network as something that could be used not only as an ability for a bank to very quickly access the gold, the physical gold. Our gold is fully redeemable, quickly and cost effectively. It can be used as a means of payment. In other words, you are now paying in physical gold whilst it's priced in dollars. You're not actually settling in US dollars. You're using it as a means of payment outside of that system. And also as a means for any margins on any swaps. So there are many use case applications for GoldGram coin on Corda. So this gives you an idea of what we've done. And we are now in the process of looking at other use cases and of rolling this out in a more comprehensive way. The technology for this was all developed by Darren McVean's company, Quantum Crowd. So we developed this in Asia, and it's taken over a year of full-time development. We have our proprietary apps for GoldGram, and I'm going to hand over now to Darren, who's going to tell you a little bit more about what he does with his company. All right.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lawrence. So our company, Quantum Crowd, has 3 offices in the Philippines, now 1 in Australia, and soon an office in Bangalore and Dubai. We only work on blockchain. Total developers at the moment is somewhere around 130 to 150. We are chain agnostic. I've been in the space for about 5 years. We've built a lot of things on Ethereum, Hyperledger, Stellar, BitShares. But it was about 18 months ago I was speaking at a banking conference with Tom Menner from Corda, and that was really my first exposure to Corda. So at that point we started training 10 developers, and what became very apparent to us was the scale-up time for Corda of building teams was a lot easier than, say, on Ethereum. So we were finding that with Ethereum, we might be training a developer for 9 to 12 months before we could get any real value out of them. However, with Corda, if we were recruiting well and we were getting somebody with good Java skills or good programming skills, we could usually deploy them on a commercial project inside 3 months. So now I think we've probably got around, of that sort of 130 to 150, nearly half are Corda developers working on some pretty exciting applications. So I was really just going to talk about what we see in the industry and some of the things other than tokenizing gold. One of the, I guess, unique parts of our business is, yes, we are we're an app developer for other companies, but we have long experience in cryptocurrency. So we actually hold a principal regulated license for 4 cryptocurrency exchanges out of a regulatory territory in Asia. And from that, it sees us wanting to really look at this tokenization space and where can we take it. So some of the projects that we're working with, one is John Reynolds with Kahoot. Kahoot was formed out of Instant Property Network, which did one of the largest trials on Corda earlier this year with around 40 groups. And what John's building with our team is basically the build, buy and occupy of real estate that can track provenance of materials that go into a construction all the way through. Also enables faster settlement. So at the moment, the journey is very fragmented for real estate, where once you put in your offer, you don't know where the real estate agents are at, where the conveyancing is, where solicitors are. So he's building a very comprehensive platform there. But ultimately then looking at things around tokenizing of real estate, and we see that as very exciting. Another one with Michael Reeves out of Japan. Michael has decades of experience in capital markets, and we're working together for corporate actions. So what we see is, it's great to create all of these digital assets out there that will enable us to facilitate faster transactions. But if these digital assets aren't aware of corporate actions or automating, then we've just coupled new technology with old broken back office systems. So for those of you that don't know, corporate actions, I think there's around 16 different events that typically happen for every listed company in the world. So these could be a dividend, a stock split, those types of things. And at the moment, that is a very broken process of company calls an AGM, and now it's back to managing pieces of paper and proxies and votes, and where are these shares, which CSD are they in, so with Michael's experience, we're now building for the Corda platform, basically an extension of the token SDK, so that people can be building these digital assets and automating a lot of that project. So very exciting. Another one that we're doing in banking is for standard settlement instructions. These are all on Corda. So we've, with some partners in Belgium, we've developed a platform which will be commercially released very soon. And basically it allows counterparty banks to be able to ensure that they are managing their SSIs perfectly for the transactions of stocks to fiat. What's interesting in that is that currently about 19% of all SSI transactions fail. Very, very high number. And there's a looming deadline for new CSDR regulation in Europe in August next year that actually will say the counterparty is responsible if the trade fails. So that's a solution that we think helps with that tremendously. Another one we just came from India last week. We were there for a week. Dr. B.R. Shetty, who owns Finabler, or he owns 90% of Finabler, listed on the London Stock Exchange. It owns Travelex worldwide. He is the major shareholder in NMC Healthcare. He purchased the world's oldest tea plantation in India about 18 months ago. Paid $160 million cash, no due diligence. And he did it from very, very pure motives in that the company was in liquidation. It had 28,000 farmers, which have family, roll that up to 100,000. And Prime Minister Modi reached out to him and he bought it for that. Now what we've done is we had a week workshop where we flew experts from Israel, the US, Philippines, Australia, and they are now putting, which we will build on Corda, being able to track the tea from the tree all the way through to the cup. What they're doing as part of that project is they're investing in putting networking infrastructure across the 500 kilometres of tea plantations. He's funding it all, where they will have IoT sensors throughout the field and throughout the production stage. And we will take that data from these IoT sensors, encrypt it, and put it on a Corda node. And ultimately, it's to look at innovative solutions around tea marketplaces, also around insurance, trade finance, and those types of things. But it's a very exciting one where he's actually invested in a company that has fully autonomous drones. So these drones will be doing the spraying of the chemicals and fertilisers onto the tea without any human intervention. And none of the workers at the tea plantation will lose their job. They'll just be assigned new jobs that are hopefully healthier for them and less stress. So we see a tremendous amount of momentum in the industry. If I look at this space 5 years ago, it was I'd probably have a unicorn shirt on with rainbows, and we'd be talking about use cases that just aren't going to happen. And for me, this journey has become interesting now because it's grown up. So when you go to conferences now, you're starting to have intelligent discussions with regulators. You're starting to see people that actually have real industry experience in whatever they're doing, as opposed to sort of technology ideologists and creating that. So we're seeing more interesting applications coming in. We're seeing them be larger. So, in the beginning it was all proof of concepts, maybe proof of concept to an MVP. We're now starting to see some governments go straight through to tender of a full commercial solution. So that's exciting. I think from a Corda perspective, we still do nearly half as much development off Corda than what we do on Corda, but that shift is definitely changing for us. At the moment, we lead with the question, why not Corda? And I think there's been two things from our experience. One, the technology is I think the architecture of it is perhaps better thought out. For me, it's just not feasible that commercial banking applications will be put on public chains. There might be some use cases for it, but it just won't happen. It's not the world we live in. So I think Corda's been architected that way very well. They've been able to build a very strong engineering team. But I think what is different is the approach that it takes to work with R3. So without going into it, some of the other commercial blockchain solutions are the support is non-existent. and I don't. We don't see that problem with R3 or Corda, and I think even in the case of GoldGram, so the solution has been completely built using a combination of Ethereum and Hyperledger, and we now have it completely being built native to Corda, and we sort of see them as two separate markets, or Lawrence uses it as different highways, where you've got the highway that cars go on, but for Corda, that's where the Formula One cars are on the track, if you're wanting to trade billions of dollars of gold, one of the interesting things in gold is I think there's 1,500 times more unallocated gold than there is allocated gold. So that just means there's
paper gold.
There's paper gold out there floating somewhere, and will that happen into the future? But, all right, I think that's pretty much our presentation. But if there's any questions, or
I'll start with maybe one related to GoldGram. What have been your biggest challenge and learnings in building GoldGram? And is there complexity in tech or governance side of things?
Good question.
Interesting one. I think the biggest is what I touched upon earlier, is actually linking the asset to the underlying, the token to the underlying asset. So that in the event, in our case, of GoldGram ceasing to exist, that the holder of the token, whether it's inside our private Hyperledger on the public Ethereum or on the Corda network, can actually redeem either the physical metal or sell it for cash, exists. So there's a true link where you have embedded in each token the gold reference number, the transaction number, and everything that relates to that specific allocated and segregated gold on the ledger. That's most important. I think technologically, people are creating tokens all the time and doing them quite easily. I think what's been important on our side is the smart contract, the level of security, the adaptability. In the case of Corda, it's a fixed token value because it is fungible and divisible. So these are important factors. So I think that really, in a nutshell, is probably the way I'd look at it.
Yeah, I think the technology is fairly straightforward, and building and designing these tokens isn't terribly difficult, but it's really the approach to the scope at the start and the architecture, because what you find is developers may be excellent at developing, but they're not experts in financial markets or in the gold trading process. So correct. I think when you're building these things, it front load the thought process at the start into the architecture, and then that makes the development process much easier.
Correct.
One of the interesting things, so Lawrence touched on, so embedded inside the token is actually the serial number that comes out of the Royal Canadian Mint. That's the best way that things can be done at the moment, and from that there's a living will that's been created so that if GoldGram ceases to exist, you can go back and redeem. But there's some amazing technology that's going to start coming to the Corda community fairly soon. There's an Australian company with Israeli technology called Security Matters. And Security Matters has the ability, there may be some people that know it from here, but you're able to put in a digital marker into any liquid, solid or gas. And think of it like a digital barcode, invisible to the human eye on any liquid, solid or gas. And they have like a QR code reader. It's pretty inexpensive, and you can put these markers on anything. So you could put it on gold. Our company's working with Security Matters, where we've done the trials for it on Corda, where you can insert this invisible marker onto the gold as a bar. You could then melt it down and make a pair of earrings, scan the earring, it will tell you which bar it came from, and then you could melt it back down, and it never loses that trace all the way through. So they're doing some amazing things around provenance of aeroplane parts. That's another application that there's a company that's displaying out there, Aerotracks, some young guys that our company's the one that developed that. So I think you'll see this, this inextricable link that Lawrence talks about becoming real. It's always been that thing, we can create a digital pair.
It'll become the gold standard.
But now you can actually, what is in the coin is that. So.
Yeah.
Cool.
I'll ask you last question because we're running out of time. Sorry, guys. There are a lot of questions, but I'm sure that Darren and Lawrence will be hanging around. Last one would be, how is GoldGram different to other gold-backed coins? For example, the CoinShares Gold offering launched this week.
I think we come back to what we're saying about that inextricability. In the event that the company issuing the tokens ceases to exist, how do you know, other than if they tell you that there is physical gold behind it? And the vault or mint storing the gold, who do they look at as the owner of the gold? So I think in a nutshell, not to run over, it's all about that link. And there's some very, very good projects out there. And I don't believe it's going to be winner takes all. I think that there'll be room for some serious players. But you need to satisfy these things on a regulatory basis as well.
Yep.
Is that good?
Right. Yeah, I hope I answered the question. Thanks, Duncan. Thanks,
All right.
Lawrence.
Thank you very much. Thank you.